Okay, so Jane, let's start. You're going to be key speaker within our FIAD event, our FIAD forum next first, the second and third of June. And you're going to be addressing something that I really find absolutely interesting, modern workplace learning. So, a sneak peek, what can we expect from your presentation?
Okay, well, for me, I call modern workplace learning um, of the whole concept about helping people learn in their organizations, but not just focusing on training, learning from training, but learning in all the ways possible, learning from doing your job, from interacting with people, from finding out things for yourself, and taking responsibility for your own development. So modern workplace learning is about supporting all those ways of learning, not just focusing on training.
Okay, so that's really looking for a more complete kind of learning from every perspective.
Yes, I think the trouble is when people hear the word learning, they think about training or sitting in a classroom or doing an online course, something like that when they've been told to do or they're being instructed or they're doing it in a very formal way. But a lot of the research that I've done shows that, people learn actually not so much from that kind of way of learning, but learning a lot from what just doing their day job, from interacting with their managers and their team and people outside the organization, not necessarily to do with the business, but professional contacts and on their social networks and so forth. And people don't recognize that as learning as such, but it's something just happens every day. And for learning and development departments, they don't focus on that because they think it's sometimes not important, but probably because they don't think it's part of their job to do that. But I think there's so much more we could do to support those ways of learning at work. So at work, for work, and through work. So you don't just have to sit in a classroom or do an online course to learn. You're learning every day, but let's make the most of it. Let's help people not lose track of all those very important learning experiences they have every day in their work, because a lot of it just does disappear. But so how can learning and development departments, but also managers, and they're really, really key now. It's no, it's not something where managers just pass everything off to the learning and development department. They need to take much more responsibility for supporting that learning, particularly the stuff that happens in the daily work. So it's quite a big concept, and I think it's really become quite important because of lockdown and everything. People are thinking much more about how they're going to support their people and working. And so the time has come to start thinking about things in a different way and rethink how we can help people much more in the workplace or working from home, whatever it is, to do more for themselves and support them in other ways.
Mm-hmm. Jane, when you approach people, employees and bosses, managers, with this idea that they really get to involve, they really need to get involved in this learning because it happens every day, it happens in every task, it
Yeah.
happens all the time.
Yeah.
Do they realize that is that important, that they are learning all the time, that they are learning, they are always learning, and there is something new that they could achieve not only in the classroom, not only in a web seminar, not only in those places.
Yes, I mean, it depends. Some people think that that type of learning is not important, it's not valid unless you've been taught by somebody in a classroom or an online course, then what you've learned is not of importance. Where other people do recognize that it happens every day and it's very, very important. So there's a whole spectrum of people. Fortunately, I'm lucky. I work with the people who do recognize it and want to do more, and I can help them with some ideas and suggestions about how to do that. What I don't like to do is to force it into people who haven't really understood it for themselves. It's a mindset change about what learning is. And, when they're ready to take that step, I'd be there to help them. But I don't like to sort of like bang on doors and say, you've got to think like this.
I understand.
So, uh, but more and more people beginning to recognize that learning is much more than just training.
You have just mentioned something really important about mindset and changing this mindset. A couple of weeks ago, we had an interview with Tom Hack, another key speaker within Fiat, and he mentioned that exactly. He gave an example about how a learning development program from the government was not really successful. And he mentioned that it was not really successful because the government did not really take into consideration mindsets of the people who are going to be addressed with that program. He thinks we should probably take a step back and think about the mindsets before doing these massive programs of retraining, upskilling, reskilling, and everything, because we are missing the most important part, probably.
Yes, that's absolutely right. I think a lot of training gets designed in a way outside of what people are doing on a daily basis, and then it's sort of forced upon them. And there's tons of evidence to show that that really doesn't work. If there is something that people need to do or know, then one of my suggestions is that you actually work with those people to find out the best way it would be to help them achieve any new knowledge or skills or whatever it is, not just push something on people that perhaps they don't want. It's got to fit into their working lives, and that some people just can't spend hours sitting at their computer doing this. So if you might be giving them little pieces now and again, it really depends. But people get hung up on the sort of trendy stuff, social learning and micro. Yes, it all has a part to play, but it's got to be the right solution for the problem. But as I say, it's not always about making people do things. It's about helping them do much more for themselves as well. And that's another mindset thing, because, learning development people think that they need to tell people what they need to know and what they need to do. But actually, people do know an awful lot about, what they need to do. There are many people who are already doing lots and lots for themselves, but that, we can help some of those people who are perhaps struggling with, where should I go? What could I find? How could I do this? In terms of just supporting them in pointing them in the right direction, and building that new way of taking things from yourself, becoming more self-reliant and self-sufficient, and not having to be, I say, spoon-fed everything, just waiting for it to come to you, but to do things for yourself.
Knowledge with you.
Well, that's what they say. That people are just sort of putting knowledge in people's heads, but that doesn't. Putting it in doesn't necessarily going to stay in there. It only stays in there if you go out and you find it yourself, you explore, and you make the connections yourself between what you know and what you found. And for me, that's the way I talk about it as important, because it has been so important for me in my own work. I don't think I've been on a course for years and years and years, but if I need to know something, I'll go online, find out. If something comes up I don't understand, I'll find out what that means first. But by doing that, you kind of learn so much more, because you're putting the effort in. Whereas if you're just reading something on the screen and pressing the next button, it's unless you've got really intense interest or motivation for it, it's just going to be irrelevant. And I know so many people who have to do courses like that, and they just sit there and go, oh. So we spend an awful lot, well, a lot of money is spent on producing things like that. So the other thing I say is, don't do big, sophisticated, expensive courses. Think about little things you can do, little resources that you can provide for people that they can find when they need them. If you're going to create stuff, create small things. Don't create huge courses that, like this, what you were telling me about earlier, you know, because A, they don't want, people don't want to do it like that, and B, you know, it's the success rates, you know, and I'm not talking about completion rates, but about success in terms of changing behavior or new skills isn't that great. But if people can, you know, perhaps do things more the way they prefer to do it, and make them as flexible as you can so that they do fit into people's lives, do things in the way people like to do things, it works better. But again, you know, that's another big mindset change for learning development people who have, you know, been
Absolutely.
trained to create courses in instructional designers. That's what they do. But and there's a lot of skills there, but you know, let's try and apply them to this modern workplace where A, people are not necessarily going to be there all the time, and B, that, you know, it's about giving people things to do in the way that they would like to do it. So flexible enough. So one person who might want to read through everything, you know, another person might want to dip in and out. You know, we've got to think about flexibility here.
Absolutely. Probably flexibility is the most important word when we think about in terms of new learning, in terms of acquiring new knowledge, and something that you mentioned before that is crucial for companies, associations, enterprises, wherever, is that to have their people perform in a better way afterwards. To really
Yeah. I
have
mean,
the
that's the
ability
goal, isn't
to
it?
do a better
The
job.
goal is to change, you know, performance, to increase performance, or uh, a new skill or whatever it is. It's not about the learning per se. It's not about the bit, and that's the means to the end. So that means needs to be the right means, the most appropriate way of doing that. And everybody just thinks it's, you know, they've got a problem, solution, and the middle is the course, and it's not necessarily the case, you know. But as I say, it's back to this mindset thing. It's back to managers realizing, you know, they can't just solve their problems with a course or whatever it is, and L&D people thinking, you know, that the course is the way to solve the problem. So, but I think people are changing gradually, but it's not. We're not all there yet.
Yeah, there are still some steps to be taken to arrive there. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, when you work with people, do you find differences in culture connected to this approach? Do people from different culture, from different backgrounds, do have the same kind of feeling about this learning approach and changing their mindsets about learning? I
I
mean,
think there is.
we live in a multicultural country. You
So,
really
what was the last thing?
you really live in a cosmopolitan in a country where there are lots of
Oh,
people coming from lots of different places,
yeah.
lots of different cultures, nationalities.
Yeah, I mean, it does vary. I think certainly, perhaps more Eastern. I'm going to generalize here because, you know, I don't know. It's very difficult. I think perhaps it isn't so much nationalities, although some cultures are much more about formal. The emphasis is on formal learning, much more than perhaps in some cultures. But you know, it's also about people. It's also about their age. You know, older people who've been perhaps used to classrooms, but you know, I'm an older person and I don't think like that. So it's very easy to generalize. And actually, some of the research I've done, younger people are actually very focused on courses because that's how they've been doing it in schools. You know, they think that's the way to learn. I mean, they haven't been exposed to the idea that, you know, they need to do things for themselves, and in the workplace they're going to get more out their job probably than going on a training course. So, you know, it's very difficult to generalize, but you know, it does vary around the place. And as I said earlier, I'm lucky that I work with the ones who do think differently, who want to change their practices. But you know, sometimes when I'm speaking at conferences and people say, you know, it wouldn't work here, that wouldn't work here, um, and that some of them they create barriers to make it work, and I think it's as a control thing. You know, I don't want to let go of what I'm doing, and I'm frightened that if I stop doing what I'm doing, I might be seen as irrelevant. But, you know, I always say that if you broaden your approach to supporting learning, you're actually expanding your potential to impact the organization. So for me, it seems, you know, that just creating courses or being a trainer is a very small part of it, and you could end up being in a little corner, whereas the people who want to go out and do more probably have more exposure in the business, and therefore could potentially could help them much more. But again, that's something for every individual to think about. And there are some people who are just quite happy doing what they're doing, and that's fine. But I just think there's a lot more people could do. And often when I talk to people, you know, trainers, or when they realize there is a world outside of the training room, they're very inspired by that. So again, it's very difficult to sort of, you know, pigeonhole people. There's a whole range of
thinking about that. Jane,
it really
it was really interesting to have this conversation with you. You were really open about what's going on and how you see the world and how you see this learning new approach and mindset and everything you mentioned before. Thank you very much for your time. We are really, really excited about your participation in CR. We are really excited about listening to you, your conference about modern workplace learning. And well, I think that this is going to leave a lot of people thinking.
hope so.
Your presentation is going to be really, really interesting. Jane,
Okay,
thank you
good.
very much for your time.
Thank
Have a
you.
beautiful day.
Thank you. And you. Bye.
Bye bye.